Okay. And we're good to go. Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone, for coming along. This one I thought was quite topical. I had a lot of emails coming in over the last few months about errors, how to fix them. So I thought, let's talk about WordPress errors. It's a very beginner-focused thing. So I'll take you through some of the common errors that pops up with WordPress and some ideas on how to fix them. Quick thank you to our sponsors. So we've got Kinetics, we've got WP Engine, we've got Plesk, WordPress, and Microsoft as well. They contribute towards the pizzas, they contribute towards the free venue and everything as well. But they also support all the community in Australia as well. So all the events that we put on, they're our sponsors behind us. They chuck a lot of money in. So go and visit them. That'd be great.
Sorry, and can you tell them thanks on our behalf?
I will do.
For the pizza.
For the pizza. Thanks, WP Engine. Okay, so what we normally do is we normally just go around the floor. You can introduce yourself, say who you are, what you do with WordPress, if you like. If you don't want to, that's fine. I'll go first. So my name is Wil Brown. I'm one of the organizers for the WordPress Sydney meetup. I'm a developer, so I do back-end development. I do a little bit of WordPress consultancy as well. The WordPress work that I generally do is mostly third-party integration. So I use products like Zapier, Integromat, it's now called Make, Uncanny Automator, and I basically connect WordPress to other systems. And if they don't work through Zapier, then I write the code to make them connect and transfer the data between them. So that's what I specialize in. But I do e-commerce sites and other sites as well, but that's me. Anyone like to go first?
Gabriel, I'm another developer. Basically, my interaction with WordPress is mostly configuration and so forth. I have successfully made a plugin since we last spoke, so I'm getting familiar with hooks and so forth in there.
That's great.
But that's basically me. I've been a developer a long time, but my WordPress knowledge is fairly shallow.
And you don't want to promote Volt?
Sorry?
The plugin.
Oh, no.
It's not the development.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm Claire. I'm a freelance developer. I do a lot of WooCommerce customizations for a few different clients, but my main client is a guy who just has ideas all the time about what should be done with WooCommerce, and I build those ideas.
Excellent. Welcome. Anyone else?
So we're not going in any order?
No.
Okay.
Your turn.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah, I'm Hopkit, that's my name. And my business is Jamaican Products. I have a website and I fell out with my person who was doing organizing my website for me. So I'm now it, because I have 3 people working for me, myself, and I. So, how life is with that level. So I have a few issues and things I think we need resolving or getting some help with.
Great.
So that's my story.
Cool. Thanks. Welcome. Anyone else?
I'm Andrew. I used to be a software developer. Now I'm learning a bit about WordPress. I'm starting to host WordPress websites for companies and others. I'm just learning how to host it, how it works.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm Helen, and I am a boutique scientific company, and I'm looking after the website. So common errors is something that is going to be very good for me.
Cool. Bring it on.
Kittens, the programs for IT policy, and their main site is in WordPress. Sometimes they want to change the styling, get some context, so they do some very basic stuff with WordPress.
Great. Thanks. Anyone else? You have to.
Hi, I'm Ravi. I'm a developer at ARN, and we have 70 WordPress sites, and day-to-day developing WordPress plugins and other things. My knowledge is not very deep. I've only been doing it for about 3 months. But interested to meet people in the community and be a developer.
I think it's the most number of plugin developers we've had in a single room. Okay, that's good. Well, thanks very much for being here.
We have 2 people who haven't said much.
Okay.
You don't have to.
It's not necessary.
I know, but at least it would help people like me.
Okay.
Like say,
Okay, fair enough. I created last year a website called MyProx, where I list clothes, and then it's a marketplace. So if you want to sell your clothes, you can jump on and become a vendor.
Great.
But it's not completely, it's still a beta.
Development.
It's very beta environment at this stage.
And I'm Sharon. I built my husband's website, and yeah, just sort of wanted to know a little bit more about, because I have to make sure everything works. So just want to make sure I know what the ins and outs of it.
Well, thank you, everyone. I know it's a bit of an AA meeting thing, that, but going around. Hi, I'm Will. I'm a WordPress developer. But it's good to just get to know everyone in the community. So, thank you. Okay, so there's a good resource if you're beginners. There's learn.wordpress.org. They're putting a lot more effort into this. They're really kind of pushing this at the moment. So this is from Automatic. Some of the tutorials and workshops are automaticians, but most of them are just general developers and freelancers that have put tutorials together. But it's probably a good place to start at, because most of the tutorials are fresh in there, and most of them are with the block editor. Once you start looking on YouTube and stuff, a lot of them are older type of tutorials. So that's a good place to get up-to-date tutorials for those. So keep an eye on that. Okay, so WordPress errors and how to fix them. Let's have a look at some of these. Okay, before we go on to the actual errors, here are some general strategies that generally work. So this is like kind of your first port of call if something goes wrong with WordPress. You'll see the first three are all cache related, because 9 out of 10 times, maybe not 9 out of 10 times, a large percentage of the times when someone's got an error on a page, it's usually something to do with caching. So they've made a change, you go and view the page, it doesn't quite look exactly like they've just done. And it's usually a browser caching issue or a larger caching issue. So the first thing, if you find an error, is to try and clear your browser cache. Now you can hold the shift down and do an F5 for the browser, and that temporarily on that one refresh will just load new contents in for that one page. Then the next time you look around, it still goes into the cache. So that's a temporary fix. Just have a look at the page. Otherwise, you're going into your browser settings and you're deleting all your cache data for there. Now, just bear in mind when you're deleting cache that the web browser retains a lot of stuff. So you might not want to wipe out passwords. You might not want to wipe out cookies. It's very selective as to what you want. Otherwise, just if you want to delete everything, but then your browser's going to ask for passwords and you're going to have to download stuff again. But certainly, a general strategy if something goes wrong with WordPress is to clear your browser cache. The second one is if you're running your WordPress through a CDN like Cloudflare, remember they've got caching as well. That's basically what they do. They take a copy of your website. So if you are running it through Cloudflare, go and clear that cache as well. And lastly, if you're running a cache plugin, go and disable that if you're having these types of on-page errors. Because again, WordPress will look at the HTML files that it's cached rather than show you the fresh stuff. So first line defense, I always say to people is like clear your browser cache and then see if the error persists. The one down the bottom, so use WordPress debugging. I'm not going to cover debugging tonight, but WordPress comes with a whole debugging tool. It's off by default, but you can turn it on. Once you turn it on, then it writes everything to a log file in your WP contents folder. So it's called debug.log. And in there, you can have a look, and if there's any errors, you can usually pick out what's happening. And it'll tell you the file path, which will it'll lead you to a plugin or a theme, if that's that particular area. So that's another option to do. If you are using debugging, just make sure that once you've fixed the issue, go and switch debugging off, because it's right into the log file all the time. It will slow your website down. Then there's this is the one in the middle, disable all plugins. That's kind of a turn it off, turn it on type thing, support thing. So what we're doing here is if you're unsure, if you've done all these things and you still got an issue with WordPress, and you're a beginner, you're not confident with using debug modes, one of the easiest ways to track down an error with WordPress is to disable all the plugins and then re-enable them one by one. And then after re-enabling one, refresh the site to see if that error persists. And normally as you're going down, you'll get to a point where you've replicated the error. So now you know which plugin is the issue with that. So that's It's kind of a fail-safe beginner's way of finding conflicts and issues. It's disable all plugins and re-enable them one by one. If that still doesn't work, then I suggest swapping out your theme to one of the 2020 themes. So WordPress comes with like 2021, 2022, all that sort of stuff. So these are the themes that have been developed by the core team with WordPress. So WordPress and that 2020 theme, with all your plugins disabled, that should be your bare minimum setup that will work. You know it works. So if you still get an error when you're in WordPress with no plugins and a 2020, then it's probably a hosting issue because you're fairly confident. That's like the minimum that you need to run WordPress. It's still not working, then go to your host and raise a support ticket. But usually by disabling plugins, re-enabling them, or switching to your theme, you can kind of identify where the problem is. So if you disabled all your plugins, you still got the problem, you then swap out your theme with 2020 and it works, then you know that the problem is in your theme. So these are general tools to kind of locate where the error is before you actually start on specific errors. But it's good to have these in your tool belt. Okay, so we'll start this one. This is the white screen of death, and it was renamed. That's similar to Microsoft. So in older versions of Microsoft, you get the blue screen of death, whereas all of a sudden it just go blue for no reason at all. Well, in earlier versions of WordPress, we used to have this white screen of death. And what's happening here is WordPress is a PHP application. So PHP is the code that WordPress is written on. And if some of that PHP doesn't work properly, then it just fails. Yeah? And sometimes that would just result in a completely white screen. It just stops working, it just stops processing. So nothing's output to screen. I just left this white screen in. I mean, for a beginner, it's just, where do you go from here? You can't. So that's why it's called the white screen of death. Nobody knows where it is. So hopefully all running up-to-date versions of WordPress. So as of version 5.2 of WordPress and above, they've put in, the core team have put in a capture process. So if it sees there's a PHP error, a fatal error, what it's called, then you'll at least get this message now that says the site's experiencing technical difficulties. And it will send the admins an email. And the email will contain a link to go into the dashboard, and it actually tries to figure out which plugin is causing an issue, and it will disable that. So you can actually get back into the WordPress website and have a look around. So that's what happens with this one just now. If you have got to this stage, then some of the remedies is using the WordPress debugging tool. You're probably going to have to at this point because it's a PHP error. It's a code error. So because you can't get into the website, you're going to need to use debugging. So turn on your WordPress debugging, have a look in the debug log, go down and see where this error is. And you should have a file space, and it should say wp-content/plugins, and this thing happened in this. So at least you'll know it's that kind of plugin, or your theme as well. Or again, you could use the disable all plugins. Again, just turn them all off, and then re-enable them one by one to see which one is causing this issue. But that's largely went away now with this ability for the email to get back into the background. And at least it's no longer just a white screen. This is another common error that's that kind of threw off some beginners. This is called an internal server error. And if you get this when you're a WordPress beginner, it can really do some people's head, and you don't really know where to go from here. What's happened is the web server has had a look at the code behind the web page, and for whatever reason, it's asking the web server to do something that it doesn't want to do, or it can't do. So the web servers went, no, I can't deal with that. And it throws what's called an internal server error, or a 500 error, as it's called. Now, there's some things that you can maybe do yourself to combat this. Sometimes this happens when the servers try to process a really large page, so like lots of code on it, or if you're an Elementor or Beaver or Divi and you've dragged 1,000 components on it and it's really heavy, then the web server can actually run out of memory when it's trying to process all that, and it can fall over and cause this. So one remedy is to increase your PHP memory. Now, if you're a beginner, you go, what's that? I don't know how to do that. That's okay. An easy one is to raise a support ticket with your web host provider, and they will increase that for you. Because again, this is an application. It's underneath. So this is PHP. It's the code that WordPress is written in. And if that runs out of memory, you've actually got to go to the configuration file and add more memory. So that'd be a support ticket for your web post. Sometimes it can be caused by plugins that ask the web server to do something that it can't do or shouldn't do. For example, trying to write to some place that it's not allowed to. That can also cause an internal server error. And if it's a plugin, well, you've got the plugin trick of disabling everything and see if it works again, and then re-enable them one by one to find that culprit. So there's a few reasons. It could be an internal server error, but your most likely way to combat that is to raise a support ticket with your web post providers. So don't panic if you get those things. It's just a process of figuring out what it is and getting it back up again. So 404, similar to 500, but we've all encountered 404 page not found. It's not a great experience if your visitors are finding lots of 404s on your web page, and it's not good for SEO as well. So I encourage you as website owners to regularly look at your page results in the Google Search Console and to look at the 404 pages, because the more problems that Google finds your website, that it's going to rank you lower for those. So what happens when you try and visit a page that you know exists, but you still got a 404? Well, it could be something like a misconfigured redirection. So it could be a broken link, but most of the time, if it's your own website, you kind of know it's there. So a reason that could happen is a lot of the SEO plugins that you get, they have what's called a redirection. So if you've maybe had an old page and you want to move over to a new page, then you can put in a new URL and put in the old one, and it redirects it to the new URL. But sometimes people can put in the misconfigure the actual redirection itself. So you might think you've put it in correctly, but it's not been done properly, and it results to page not found. So if you do have a page on your website and it's come up with a 404 and you don't know why, the best thing to do is check your SEO plugin and have a look in the redirections, because some of these plugins, they'll actually create a redirection automatically if you change the link of a post or a page. So for example, Yoast SEO, if you go and rename what's called the permalink, and that's the URL of your blog post, Yoast will automatically create a redirection to the new link, for the old link to new link for those. So just bear in mind that sometimes plugins like that can be playing around with the URL structure. One other thing it could be is there's a little hidden file called htaccess. Not all web servers use it. Apache does, Nginx doesn't, the web server. But it could be that something's corrupted that. This little file, htaccess, it kind of handles a lot of the redirections of URLs. It's an important little file, but if it gets corrupted or if it's missing or something, then that could have an issue. If you're finding lots of 404 pages on your website all of a sudden, then it's probably due to like a misconfiguration file, like htaccess or something. Again, you can probably get to that with File Manager on your control panel. But if you've done the first one, if you're sure the link is there, if you've not found a redirection and you don't know what to do with htaccess, it's worthwhile raising a support ticket with your web post and just to say, oh, this is what's happening. I've tried all this stuff. I don't know what's happening. And they'll probably look at the back end for that. But those are the rough problems that can happen round about our 404 pages, especially if you're unexpectedly finding those. Number 4, anyone had this one? I've had this heaps of times. Sometimes when you're trying to set up WordPress, maybe for the first time, you can get this that comes up rather than your website. Or if you move your web host over to a different vendor, you get this error, establish a database connection. WordPress is a collection of files, but it's also a database as well. So every time you type in content, post content, except for images, so all your words, your paragraphs and stuff in pages and posts, that's actually stored in a database. And if WordPress can't get access to that database, then it's going to throw up this error here. Now, the main reason for this, if this happens, if you're setting up WordPress, it could be that your login information is wrong. So WordPress is an application. It needs to log in to the database server. So it needs a database name. It needs a username and a password for those, and also a machine identification. It needs to know which server to look at as well. So kind of 4 things that WordPress needs to connect to the database. So something could have went wrong, in your wp-config.php, that's the configuration file, the main configuration file for WordPress. That contains all the username and password for the database. So go and have a look in there and make sure it's the right one, especially if you're moving host. When you create a new WordPress hosting account, then the web host will send you a big email with all the details. So with FTP, it'll have your database details and login as well. So have a look at that and make sure it's the same. So that'd be the first protocol. The second the second one isn't really anything you can do about yourself, fix yourself. So you could get this error if the database server crashes. Now it doesn't happen often, but it can. I'm guessing most of you here will have shared hosting or web hosting accounts rather than run your own server. Run your own server is called a VPS, or virtual private server. If you're not got one of those, then you're kind of in a managed service. So if the database server has crashed and this persists, then the only real recourse you have is to raise a support ticket with your web host, because they are the people who know where the database server is. They can then restart it again. So if you're getting this here, definitely check your configuration. Make sure your database details are correct. But if they are, then probably the database server has crashed and you need to get the web host to fix that and bring it back up. This can be quite a common one. So this is when you are updating WordPress, themes and plugins. And you know how it takes a few minutes or something, depending on how many plugins and stuff you have. If after maybe 3 or 4 minutes, you're still getting this message, briefly unavailable scheduled maintenance, then it probably means your WordPress is stuck in maintenance mode. So what happens when you're updating WordPress core or themes or plugins is WordPress downloads a zip file from the source. It downloads it to the local server. It then creates a little file called a .maintenance file, and it puts a timestamp in there. Yep. And then when people are starting to refresh on the front end, and if that little log file is there, that's what they get here. And then WordPress in the background is unzipping files, it's replacing stuff. And once that's finished, it's meant to delete that little file. But sometimes if the update process doesn't work, it doesn't finish, that little file can remain there. And then you can get locked out for this. Now, WordPress also looks at that file. Now, there should be a date timestamp. And if after, I think it's 3 minutes, if the difference between the timestamp in that little file and the real world is more than 3 minutes, then WordPress should just ignore that file. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we still get stuck in this. So the first thing to do would be go into your control panel. So that's cPanel or Plesk or your SiteGround control panel, whatever it is, and then find your file manager. So file manager is the graphic thing, same as Mac and Windows, but allows you to browse your WordPress folder space. It's usually .maintenance. It's usually in your top level file structure. It's usually called public_HTML or www or home for those, and you'll find a little .maintenance file. It's got 0 bytes. It's only got a little timestamps. It's not huge, and it's quite safe just to delete that for that. So that's one thing to do, and that should get you out of that stuck in maintenance mode for those. The next one is missed schedules, and this is very, very, very common. So if you're finding yourself, you've got some posts, you've scheduled them up, and they're not publishing themselves, or you've got backups and you're waiting to check your backup and it's not ran for like 5 weeks, and you're like, oh my God, what's happening? Then that's probably because of a WordPress cron failure. Now, WordPress cron is the internal WordPress scheduler. So it's responsible for looking at your scheduled posts and running these jobs, looking at your backup jobs and then running it on time. But because WordPress isn't like a server application, it's just a standalone application, it doesn't have access to server features like timers or stuff. So the WordPress cron, and the way it works is whenever your website is visited on the front end, so as soon as somebody looks at your WordPress, there's a little bit of code that then runs as the scheduler to look at scheduled posts and backups and stuff. The problem is if you've just got a brand new website, if you've got no visitors, then if your front of the website's not being refreshed or visited, that's never going to run. So it's not like a server scheduler that runs all the time in the background, because WordPress doesn't have access to that. It's like an inbuilt web page scheduler. So I know it's got somebody shaking their head going, yeah. Question?
I mean, Updraft Plus runs all the time, right? So it must be using real cron.
Well, there's tricks. Well, no, it doesn't use a real cron. This is.
So how does it? Because I mean, I run Updraft Plus and it runs backups every day, regardless of whether I like on my staging sites and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering why WordPress can't do that. Sorry if it's too technical.
No. It's not too technical. I mean, something will be hitting your website, and whether it's a Google crawler, or whether it's an AJAX request from one of your scripts. So as long as something hits your website or asks the web server for a request, then that's going to kick off the WordPress hooks, which then run cron. It's very low level, one of the hooks for those. But if you get no traffic at all, then cron will just not work at all. Yeah. So it's one of the big failings about the schedules. It's very common on shared hosting that this just doesn't work at all. You get all these missed schedules for those. So things that you can do. There's this plugin called Scheduled Post Trigger. Now, it doesn't fix the way that the WordPress cron works. It still works exactly the same way. But what this does is when somebody does visit your website, it then looks at all the missed schedules and it runs them for you. Because the WordPress cron doesn't care. If it fails, it misses a schedule. Next time somebody visits your website and it kicks off the cron, all your failed schedules are still failed. Whereas this little plugin actually looks at all the stuff that's failed and it will run them for you. So that's one kind of fix. The best fix is to create a server cron job. Now, these are run on the server. You'll find this in your control panel. So in Plesk or in cPanel, there'll be something called cron jobs. Cron just means schedule. And it's got an interface. It's fairly easy. This basically says it's running it every 5 minutes, I think it is. And what it does, and I'll put all these links in the presentation in the meetup page. What this basically is doing is every 5 minutes, it's running the WP-cron PHP script, which is the code that the scheduler runs in. And then that little bit at the end is just saying, don't show me any output, don't put any output to screen. So what we're doing here on the server, we're telling the server to actually run that command every 5 minutes. And the server will just sit there happily. Every 5 minutes, it'll just ping cron, and you'll never miss a cron job ever again. So this is one of the first things I do when I put a client's website live, is I put a server cron job to make sure they never have a missed schedule for that. And that works for backups as well, not just post schedules. This one here, WordPress failed to auto update. It's not a common error, but it does happen. It's happened to me a few times. So this is when WordPress has tried to auto update something. So it could be a plugin, or most likely it's itself. And it hasn't been able to do that. One of the best things to do is obviously to try and click it again. Sometimes these things happen. Sometimes it might be a server glitch. Click it again, see if it works, then happy days. If it doesn't know, then there's something probably a little bit more seriously wrong in the back end. So one of the most common issues to fix this would be to look at your file permissions in WordPress. So if it's not been set up properly, or if someone's been in there tinkering around with things, you might have a developer that's in there changing stuff, they might not have left the file permissions in a state where it can be deleted or replaced. So essentially, what WordPress does, as I said, it downloads a zip file, it unzips the file over, and it expects to be able to delete and update all the files in the background. If the permissions are wrong in the files or folders, then it's going to have a problem doing that. And this is probably the main reason for this happening. So check your WordPress file permissions. The next thing that could happen here is a timeout. So if WordPress is trying to update itself, it's doing a lot of resources in the background, it's unzipping the file, it's replacing things. If there's a lot of updates to do, then sometimes that process can just time out. Okay. So the best way to check that is to have a look at your cPanel or your Plesk, and there's a little stats area for here, and it just tells you things like the CPU usage, the physical memory, how much processes it's using. If they're all in the red, then that's a good indication that the server's probably timing out when you're trying to do this kind of heavy duty stuff. And again, that would be a support ticket to your web post to say, what's happened with the resources? Can you maybe up it a little bit, or can we find what's causing all these big resource issues? So if your WordPress is continually to fail to update, auto-update, then check your file permissions. But the next step would be to see if you're running out of resources on the server. The last recourse is to do it yourself. So rather than use the auto-updates, is to update WordPress yourself. It's a reasonably straightforward job. So here I'm in File Manager, which is, you can get that from cPanel or Plesk. You can download WordPress from the wordpress.org website. You download it. You have to do a little trick first before you upload it, though. When you download the zip file onto your local machine, unzip it, and you'll find that WordPress comes in a WordPress folder. And you don't want that WordPress folder when you're loading it up. So download the WordPress, unzip it, go into the folder called WordPress, zip all that up again, and then upload that file to the root folder, and then just unzip it, and it'll just overwrite WordPress with the latest version for there. And by the main folder, I'm talking about your public HTML. So this one here. Or it could be home, or it could be www. That's where all the WordPress stuff lives in here. Get your zip file there, unzip it. It'll write over the new version, and that'll be it. So there's always a manual way to do that if your auto updates aren't working. A common error, maximum file upload size exceeded. A quick way to tell what your upload size is to go to your media library, and just under the select files, it actually tells you what your maximum upload file is. A lot of people just don't see it because it's kind of grayed out in kind of small writing. But I know a lot of people, just kind of drag stuff from their iPhone and from the Samsung Galaxy across, so we're talking 10, 20 megabytes, 40 megabytes, 100 megabytes stuff. You probably don't need to upload all that sort of size anyway. But if you do need to do big files, then there's a couple of ways to increase that. So check what it is. That one says it's 64 megabytes, which is reasonable, I think. But there's a few places you can go to. One is your php.ini file, and you'll find that in the file manager. It's a little file in your system. And there's two lines that you have to have a look for. One's called upload max file size with underscores and post max size underscores. And you can change them up and down. So it's set to 20 megabytes. So you can up it to whatever. If you need to upload 100 megabytes, I don't know if you would want to, but that's one place you can try. But not all web posts give you the ability to change the php.ini. It's sometimes it's a reserve for just the engineers. So another place is you can go to the .htaccess file. Most of you will have something like that. We've talked about that little file before. It does permalinks and stuff like that, but it also does file sizes. So there's slightly different variables, but we're doing the same thing. So if you don't have a php.ini, you can see if you've got an htaccess. You can change the size that way. Then go back to WordPress, refresh that, and you should see that file size change. Or again, raise a support ticket with your web post for that. And then they'll be able to go into these two files or one of them and up the level for you. Okay, a little bit more about upgrading here. So here's something that's coming through. So you've tried to upload a new plugin file from a zip file, or WordPress is trying to do it, and you get this destination folder already exists, and it just fails. Now they have actually, the core team have actually addressed this in more recent WordPress versions. But what used to happen is when it downloads a zip and it tries to unzip it, if there's a folder there, then WordPress goes, I'm not going to touch that because I don't really know. It shouldn't be there, so I'm not going to unzip the folder over it. So it just kind of bail out from there. So what you would do is go into File Manager again. You'd find out the plugin folder and just delete it. Yeah, and then go and reinstall the plugin again. And because the folder's gone, then WordPress would just unzip the file. What happens usually is sometimes when it's probably file permissions, but when it's trying to delete the original file before it unzips, then sometimes the file permission's not there, not correct, and that folder is left as it is, and this whole process would stall. So quite an easy fix is to go into Control Panel, file manager, delete that folder, and then try and reinstall again, and that will work. But now you've got this that comes up. So if you have a plugin there and there's already a folder, if you want to update it again, you now have the choice to reinstall over the top of it. So that this works for if you're just searching in the repository and you find the same plugin, you want to update to a new version, but you don't want to, do the update screen, you can do it that way. Or if you upload a zip file from your local machine and do install, then it'll detect to see if it already exists. And if it does, at least this time, rather than just bomb out, it actually gives you the option to replace the whole thing as well. So hopefully you don't see that first one, but if you do, there's a manual fix to delete the folder and continue. Otherwise, WordPress should prompt you to replace everything with that with the new version. Okay. These are horror errors, by the way. You shouldn't get all of these. These are just, these are the ones that people go, oh no, what's happening to my system? So this one here, fatal error, which is lovely described, fatal error for allowed memory size. Again, this is because WordPress is a PHP app. Sometimes if using these big plugins like WooCommerce or subscription sites or something like that, it can try and do something. It just runs out of an error. It runs out of memory and just falls over, unfortunately. So knowing what to do in this instance. Again, we can jump into our configuration file for WordPress, which is the wp-config.php, and we can put this in here. So define a memory limit. You can keep going up and up and up. In fact, you can put 1 million in there, but if this website doesn't have that resources, you're not going to get it. Usually it's set to 128, 96 or 128. You don't want it too high, but you can bump up to 256 or 512. Again, you can go up. If you go crazy limit, then the server itself will say, no, I'm not giving you that. So that's a reasonable amount of a lot of memory for your PHP application to work in. So you can try that first, see if that works, and then go back and refresh.
So is that per response, or is that it's overall for its entire process book?
Yeah, that's per PHP thread.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean 256. That's a lot. If you run out of memory, then.
I've had things like that where I just had to find a better plugin rather than increasing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The plugin is just not well written.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Yeah, I mean, if you find yourself going above that and it's still not working, then there's something crazy happening in the back end. Or default raise support ticket, because when you're talking about modifying configuration files, you don't always have access to do that, or you might not know how to do that. So your fallback is always to go to your web host. I'm amazed at the number of people that hit Facebook groups first to say, how do I deal with this fatal error? I'm like, have you raised a support call with your web host? No, that should be your first port of call. They're there, so you might as well raise a request. Okay, so this one, not really a technical error, but I thought I'd include it because it's quite common. So WordPress not sending emails, or people not receiving important emails, and figuring out that they're actually not getting those emails. What's going on here? Okay. Some reasons for this, WordPress not sending emails, is one reason could be shared hosting limits. So if you're on shared hosting, I know all hosting is shared, but we're talking about like the El Cheapo shared hosting, the $2.99 a month type stuff. What's happening is your website is bunched together with about 500 other websites, all on one physical machine. So those 500 websites are all sharing for the same CPU, the same RAM, the same whatever on there. But they're also sharing the same inputs and outputs, so communication. So all it could take is for one website for a hacker to run it up and start maliciously sending out emails. And then the web host is like, no, that's not happening. I'll put a stop on that. And they will actually put a stop on that server sending out anything. So all the websites are affected for those until they can figure out who's causing all the issue and then do it. So I know that's been done in the past. Other ones is just bandwidth allocation. So if you've got everyone who's trying to do lots of things, you've got a really active community of websites on that same physical server, then sometimes the server can just run out of resources, you know, if it's expecting to do something, and it might just miss an email and not send it out. Uncommon, it's more likely to be that people are going to stop it. But, you know, there are limits for these shared hosting. They're siloed, they're in a box. And if you go outside of that resource limit, then it just stops your limit use. So it could be that there's a limitation on the number of emails that are sent out from that particular box. If it reaches that, that's it until the next hour. And then, you know, by that time, you might have missed some emails. So that's one possible problem. Another one could be this, and I know we're getting a little bit technical jargon, but this is called an SPF record. So it's a particular type of domain record. So we're kind of stepping away from the website. We're talking about the DNS at the moment. So it's a particular type of DNS record that you put in. And what it basically says is it allows you to give a machine address, which is the IP address, the 123.456, that, or a computer address, so mail.domain.com. And it tells the internet, if you want, or tells the mail servers that that server is allowed to send email on behalf of your domain. So depending on the way that the host has set up your web server, you know, it could have like a different domain name internally with the web host provider than what you have in your WordPress settings. So WordPress is trying to send out an email, say for my site, wilbrown.com, it's trying to send out will@wilbrown.com to someone else. But then the mail server says, hang on a second, that server is actually called, I don't know, buckaroo.com. And those two domains don't fit. So therefore, you're not allowed to send emails on that behalf. So that's what can happen. And this is one way around about it, is to include an SPF record where you give the name of your web server, the IP address of your web server, or the name for your web server, and you put it in your domain DNS records, and it basically tells the mail system that server there is allowed to send emails to or on behalf from wilbrown.com, and that's okay. So that's one way of fixing that problem. The last one is to use this plugin, and I use this in a lot of my clients' client websites. It's called WP Mail SMTP, and I probably urge that you guys set this up anyway. So what it does is it ignores the web server sending out emails. So PHP is the default one. So that's the web server itself is sending emails. It says, no, I don't want that. And then it's got a whole list of different options that you can send your email through. So I tend to use my Google account. So I'm sending all emails from my website, my wilbrown.com website, through my Google account. So I give it my username and password. Actually, it's not that. It's a 2FA application password, but it sends it all just through Google. And that means it's Google that's sending it. It's not the web server. You don't need to do any of the SPF domain name records. So I recommend this is the route that you go through if you want to send proper emails from your website. Okay. This one, mixed content warnings. This normally happens when people move away from HTTP and over to HTTPS. So if they get an SSL certificate, then sometimes you can get missing components in a website. Sometimes you just get like a blank screen. Maybe something looks a bit off. And this is because when you move over to HTTPS, the web server expects everything to be an HTTPS protocol. And what we're seeing here is I've chopped off a little bit here, but it's saying mixed content is not allowed. So this HTTPS web page was loaded over HTTPS. That's good, but it's requested an insecure image, and that says HTTP. So once you moved over to HTTPS, you can't have anything on that page being HTTP. Otherwise, you're going to get all these warnings and things are not going to display properly. So the biggest cause is that is somebody's moved from HTTP over to HTTPS and they've not modified the database. So WordPress stores all the URLs as full URLs in the database. So if you've moved from HTTP to HTTPS, then you need to rename them all in the database as well. Otherwise, they're all going to be stuck at HTTP. And then you're going to get this mixed request and things are going to look a bit weird for those. So the first thing to do if you're getting this mixed warning is to make sure that you have both of those set to HTTPS if you have moved over correctly. I know that some people install the SSL certificate, they forget to actually change the HTTPS here. And you know the web host and the files are thinking it's HTTPS, but then it flicks to here, and WordPress is telling you, no, I'm actually not, and it gets confused. So make sure you are running HTTPS, and you've got those 2 URLs set to that. And if you have, you can use a little trick like this. There's a plugin as well. I didn't put it on here, but this is a little trick that you can do, or your web host can do. And this is a simple search and replace from the HTTP to HTTPS. And this is a command line thing. So you can boot up a command line from within cPanel. It brings up a little thing. You just type in that, and you rename your old HTTP domain to HTTPS, and it runs through the entire database and just renames everything. So that's a real quick way of doing it. Another way of doing it, if you don't want to do a command line, is there's a plugin called Better Search Replace. I think that's what it's called. And you go into plugins, and then you type in the old domain, a new domain, and it'll run through the database and rename everything as well. And once that's done, then you shouldn't get this mixed content warning.
Sorry, so after you've done this, you run it, you could delete that line, those 2 lines after that.
Well, that's a command to do it on.
You could delete the command after because you presume it's done.
That's it done. It just needs to be done once. Yeah. Because then anything forward,
You should remember.
it'll be HTTPS. Yeah, that's right. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end. This one here, another update is currently in progress. So sometimes when you're updating WordPress, then it can get stuck. And then you go to try and update WordPress again, it comes up with this, another update is currently in progress. So what's happening here is that when WordPress updates itself, it actually writes a little lock file into the database itself. So this is different from the plugin updates. This is WordPress auto updates. So this is a little tool called PHPMyAdmin. And if you haven't come across that before, it's basically for managing the database. So what we're seeing here is a WordPress database and all the tables down below. So when WordPress is automatically updating, it puts a little lock file in your _options or WP _options table. So you can browse that. And the option name is called core_updater.lock. It should remove that by itself, but sometimes it doesn't, and you get stuck in that error. It's quite safe to delete that and then go back to your updates, and you should be able to update WordPress again. Failed to load resource. Again, this is another common thing that happens. So sometimes a plugin's not installed properly, or something's happened in the file system, somebody's deleted something. Then you can get this failed to load resource. And sometimes that can result in, for example, if it's your CSS file that's not there properly, then your whole website looks really weird because you've not got any styles applied to it. But it can mean external resources as well. So this is within your web browser. So it's called a developer tools. It's called Inspect Element. And it's got a little console, and it tells you all the errors that's happening in the website. So if your website page is not working properly, you can right-hand click on it and then bring up the Inspect Element and then the console, and you'll see all these lists of errors in there. The first thing to do is check if the file actually exists. So we have nothing we do. For local files on your server, you go into your file manager, you go into your WP content, your plugin, your theme, and just check that that file actually exists, that file path that's saying it can't load. For remote ones, you can do the same. You can just copy and paste. If it's a remote file, it'll have the HTTP. Just copy and paste that to see if it is actually there on the internet for those. But for local ones, you just look at the file manager and see if it's there. If it isn't, then it's easy to reinstall the plugin. Sometimes files do get corrupted and they might go missing or get corrupted. So it's just as easy as updating that plugin. To reinstall the plugin or theme. And again, we'll come back to this. Your WordPress allows you to do that now really easily for that. And that's it. That was the last one. So I kind of bundled together all the really horrible errors that you could get and try and show you some ways of trying to fix those. But if you got any other errors that you currently have or you think I've missed, then please shout out and I'll see if we can fix it.
I recall in times past having a lot of trouble with getting the permalinks in the nice structure and like in Apache, the mod rewrite. Do you put that in HT access now? Is that where? Because there was always this, you had to load the rewrite module in Apache to make the those nice URLs work.
Yeah, I've not had any problems with the mod rewrite for a long time, but I mostly use Nginx now, which has a different type of rewrite rules. They've got their own stuff. I've never had any problems with the rewrites for a long, long time.
But if it's not enabled and you try to use the nice permalinks in WordPress, it doesn't work right.
Yeah, it won't work. Not unless you've got it written in the htaccess and you're actually doing stuff in there. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
You mentioned that it's possible to configure the timeout, what do you call it, the time to live for a request, the time after which a timeout error will be triggered. And I think the image was you were in the cPanel and you were changing something.
Is it what for the scheduler?
Sure, I was going to ask a follow-up question about timeouts, though.
Okay, yep.
Is it possible to change WordPress default request timeout parameter? Is that something you can change? Like if you're doing debugging and you just don't want it to fail, if you're doing like a HTTP request or something.
Right. Okay.
Is there some way that you can just like tell it, just wait a little longer?
You can. So WordPress is a PHP application. So you're talking about PHP. So PHP has a maximum execution time per thread. So you'd be going into the php.ini file and having a look at your maximum execution. I can't remember exactly what the variable is, but that's where it is. But if you're on your local machine, PHP usually comes with 3 different .ini files. So one will be production. One will be a developer.ini file, and one will be kind of a normalized, it's kind of in between. So you'll find that if you copy the developer php.ini file, that the timeouts will be a lot longer for the reasons of debugging. So I think it comes with the normalized one. It could come with a live one, but yeah, look at the php.ini, you can increase those. But by increasing the timeout, you're also increasing the likelihood that you're going to drain resources on the server, because the more you have the PHP threads working, the less responsive the server is going to be. So if you give a PHP thread 10 minutes to work, it might work for 10 minutes or 9 minutes and 59 seconds because you've told it to, So bear that in mind, and that's why PHP comes with these like different levels of .ini file for production, for development. So,
Thank you.
yeah, that's a good question. Anyone else? No? So someone was talking about, I think you mentioned about backups. There's backups in here.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was errors. The context was more errors people make with WordPress. Don't.
Yes.
Oh, no backups.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a good point to raise, is that everyone should have backups and not rely on your web hosting. So make sure your WordPress is backed up regularly as well. And by regular, I mean probably daily for that.
Not a question, but one thing that you made me think of when we were talking about caching, I guess this is more for developers, but one thing that happens to me all the time is if I don't reset the version number on the enqueue script, I'm sitting there going, why is this JavaScript not working? And it's because WordPress won't reload it unless you change the version of the enqueue.
Yeah, and that's the same for CSS files and things like that. So if you're a developer and you're changing these files and you're not seeing the change, then yeah, a quick hack to that is just to put a version number. Or that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, exactly going to say that. So my development versions, I put a timestamp. So, it changes all the time, but only on development, because you don't want that. You don't want the server to reloading the same file once it's been fixed. This is just like a development hack. But yeah, it's a good one. You had another question you were thinking about?
It was a PHP question, so just but I'll ask you later.
No, that's okay.
So so obviously WordPress has encouraged everyone to upgrade to PHP 8 with the latest update to WordPress. understand that in PHP 8.1, they've introduced like an async await, I think they call it fiber or something. Is there something like that which is native to PHP? Not in PHP 8.1, but just PHP 8?
No.
And how do you do, I've just been given this task to just do vanilla REST calls.
Yeah.
And not using any external libraries or even like WordPress packages, PHP packages.
Yeah.
And like, what is the standard way that people would? Is there a way of doing it with like asynchronous? In an asynchronous way, or no, people are just doing like get and try and catch, and then it's sort of, is there then? Is there dot then? Or?
No, no. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people write their own libraries because it's not there. So when you're saying you've not to use external libraries, that you're kind of shooting yourself in your foot, because if it's not there in PHP, then guaranteed someone will have written a multitude of libraries, and that's what you really need to bring in to use that. So that's what you'd fall back on if you test the version number. Otherwise, you could use.
So, like, for example, one I've heard of is Guzzle or something.
No, not aware of that one.
Yeah, basically told I got to do everything.
Yeah.
Standard PHP. So.
Yeah, but just be careful with upgrading to PHP 8, because just because WordPress core and PHP 8 work quite nicely-ish, it doesn't mean that your themes and your plugins will work properly. So you need to test it. Like, make sure you test that on a dev machine or staging machine before you go upgrade your live. Because I guarantee at least one of these plugins that you have in there is not going to like something. Because PHP version 8 is very strict. Well, it's stricter. No, let's put it this way. PHP, before PHP, it's anything goes. It's like the Wild West. Whereas they've increased the strict level in PHP 8. So things that people could do in the past, they're less likely to get away with it when you upgrade to PHP 8. Yeah, so just be aware of that when you're upgrading. And that's for everyone. If you're upgrading just your WordPress website to like a new version of PHP, most web hosts allow you to have a staging area or development area where you copy your website across, tinker around with it, and then put it back into production. Definitely, if you're upgrading the PHP version, do that. Test it first. Yeah. Is that all? I think so. I think we've done horrible WordPress hours tonight. Hopefully you don't see any of them, but there's a few tips there to try and muddle your way out of it.
It has raised a question for me though. Like,
Yeah.
If you're talking about 128 meg per thread and blocking calls in the current version of the language, how do you? How much RAM should you allocate for a busy site? It sounds like it'll go through it a bit in cache.
Yeah, it depends. So when you're trying to measure web resources for a server, you've got to take into account things like what's the average web page size, which is going to change. Your homepage will be different, your blog page will be different, but you want to know average pages. So for example, a WooCommerce site, how heavy, what's the weight of your product page? What's the weight of your average product itself? So you'll come up with a megabyte value for that. Then you got to work out, well, how many people are on my website? What's the average hourly number of users on there? And how many requests are they making? Because you've got to multiply that megabyte by each request, because that's a page load. Okay. And then you've got concurrent users as well. So what's your concurrency? So you might have like 100 users, but over the hour, but how many people are doing that at the same time? Okay, so you might have like an average of 5 concurrent users. So that's 5 times however megabytes that you're using concurrently for that. But then you've got to work out what actions they're doing, because somebody viewing a single product page is very different from somebody adding it to the cart, which not only are you loading the page, you're also triggering off 2 or 3 admin AJAX requests, which is going backwards or forwards. So what's the weight of them? So you can start to build up how much memory your server's requiring by having a look at the number of concurrent users, number of users, page load, admin AJAX requests, and then you can kind of work out roughly, you know, what sort of memory levels and CPU levels your machine
What's
needs.
the normal range for you? I mean, you're talking 128 gig, 16 gig. Is there something where you like a very large site?
Oh, well, it depends what's running there as well. If you're just running WordPress, that's fine. But if you've got a VPS that's got cPanel, you're going to need to throw an extra gig of memory at it just to run that. So it depends on what other stuff you've got on the server that you're running there.
And in terms of session, what it keeps in session, is it basically just the session key? Like things like the shopping cart, for instance.
Yeah.
It's reconstituting that every request, is it from the database, or is it actually holding all that in memory?
Yes and no. WordPress tries, there's a whole load of variables that WordPress actually pulls out on each page request, and it caches at a certain level, like a transient. Things like the cart, though, it probably doesn't, but the session key, it probably doesn't cache that along with that. So yeah, I would assume that the session key would be something that'd be on a page on a refresh.
We'll have to hold something to correlate the sessions in the back.
Yeah, and then that stuff's held in the database. So not only have you got that data, you've also got requests to the database to do a lookup. You've got the data that comes back for that. So there's a lot of time and effort goes into trying to spec a server for like a big e-commerce site. But then you're not always thinking about just throwing stuff at one server. So rather, that's called scaling up, when you add CPU and RAM to a server. And yes, it makes it go faster, but you're going to hit a physical limit. There's only so many bits of CPU you can hammer into a physical machine. So then you need to think about scaling out. So this is where you have, if you've got a really busy website, and what happens is you get a bit of software called a load balancer, and then you run up 2 instances of your website. And this load balancer sees which one has the least amount of load on it, and it sends users to that one. When that one gets busy, it sends users to that one. So that's called scaling out. And then if you want to go to the advanced one, it's called elastic scaling. So that's when you've got these bits of software and they're looking at the different levels of traffic, and it's their decision to spin up more instances of database servers and web servers, depending on how busy it is. That's what should have happened for the Black Friday. Probably about 4 years ago, I think it was contracted out to IBM. So that's the sort of system you'd expect to have on like a really heavy marketing day, where you've got all this software that's actually looking at the traffic and it's building up and scaling out and throwing people to different instances. And then when the traffic dies down, it spins them down. So that's kind of what should happen. It's kind of called an elastic scaling, because it grows with traffic, rather than just, you know, put 10 million people on one website and it goes, which is what happened. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into server modeling. I could do a whole session on server modeling.
It would be interesting at some point just to understand what the key metrics are for WordPress particularly. I work for cloud.
A good place to look is, have you heard of somebody called Chris Lemma? So he's in the United States, but he's quite heavy into the WordPress thing. His blog has got 4 or 5 articles just on e-commerce server configurations. So those blogs would be gold for you. Chris Lemma. Yeah, he kind of wears a bowler's hat all the time. So. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for your questions. Thanks for coming along. I get a bit worried there's going to be 2 people, but it's good that you got more. If there's any pizza, please take some pizza with you. Have a couple of slices. Stay for a little chat afterwards as well. I'm just going to pack down the machine, but I'll be here for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Okay, but thank you very much. And I think next month, so I'm going to talk about content strategy. So moving away from WordPress, more into SEO things. You know, what do you need to put in place to have a content strategy? So schedules and post titles and SEO and ranking, stuff like that. How do you actually go about creating a content strategy for your website? So that'll be here next month, and that'll be the last one for the year.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
When you finish, I have a few questions for you.
No problem.